just might stop to check you out. A few years ago, actually, probably more years than I'd like to believe, I used to work as the creative director of the design department at the British Film Institute in London. And the BFI is a cultural charity, is the UK government's lead body for film and the moving image. And it has many, many activities. It promotes filmmaking and TV in the UK. It uses national lottery funds for production, distribution, education. It does conservation. It has a collection of masters. And then it has two main London venues, the BFI IMAX and the BFI South Bank, which is where I worked, and where it organizes loads of film festivals, as well as regular film seasons, and so on. This is basically to say that he was really busy with a lot of creative briefs and a lot of film watching to do because, tough life. And we had to output so many different materials in a lot of different formats, from huge front of house to tiny guide to portrait to landscape and so on. So the visual briefs all had a few things in common, such as the typeface, which, by the way, went too far, was most definitely not my choice, and I did not design the logo either. I'd like to stress that. So the briefs varied widely according to the projects. I'm just going to try again, just because I'm a really hopeful soul. Actually, I should do that, shouldn't I? No, not going to work. Never mind, I'll put this here. So the briefs were really different according to the project because there were lots of various departments that they were coming from. So, however, as regards the creative and content part, these are some of the briefs we got, and they may sound familiar to some of you. Make It Pop is an old favorite. Then another one that never failed to delight was Surprise Us. And then my absolute favorite, top of the charts, was Wave Your Magic Wand. These are not helpful indications, are they? They're hilariously irritating and vague, not for nothing, they're sort of designer memes. But there was, however, one big project that did have a really tight brief. And for this reason, every year it had some of the designers come out in cold sweats. And this was the London Lesbian and Gay Film Festival, or LLGFF, now called Flair, in order to be more inclusive. Some of the designers would really groan and huff at what they felt was an outrageous restriction to their creativity. We couldn't use any tired cliches, so no rainbows at all whatsoever. No people either, unless there was a budget for a photo shoot, which there really never was in my experience. No gender references, as that's a minefield, as I'm sure you can imagine. No generic stock images, which really, I grant you, was tough when you can't use people and when you can't use illustration either. Not because it wouldn't be a cool poster, it would, but it wouldn't be cinematic at all, so it was not wanted. And they did want a London preference because, after all, what we needed to do was get bums on cinema seats. But at the same time, we had to create an image that would be representative of the cutting-edge quality and the amazing atmosphere of this incredible festival that was so diverse and so much fun. By the way, however, pink and glitter were allowed, which was a saving grace. So one year I just took the reins and said, now we're going to go all the way in and we're going to turn this brief on its head and we're going to turn it from the strictest to the most fun of all. And we realized that each of the constraints made it possible to do this. No tired cliches, well, let's go as outrageous as we legally can. Then no people, well, animals. No gender reference, again, animals. No generic images, well, let's make or take our own. We have an excuse for that, that's fantastic. London reference, well, double-decker bus. And let's put it on Waterloo Bridge, which is what you have to cross to get to the BFI. a representative of the diversity, once again, animals. And then if pink and glitter is allowed, then let's make the most of it. And the most of it we did. We went with an outrageously pink double-decker bus, but I took the photo, really not hard to do. Again, it was an old photo because we didn't have the route master anymore. And it was driven across Waterloo Bridge by a ginger kitten, Chiro, who was a teenager at the time. And it was transporting a motley crew of all types of animals in a sort of David LaChapelle kind of mood, with butterflies, greenery, and a riot of pink and glitter. And we even had a gold blimp up in the sky. And it was acclaimed as the most successful and creative LGFF poster in years, after a long string of tired photos of platform shoes on a dance floor or couples of parakeets. The point that I'm making here is that the tougher the brief, the more creative the result. The paradox is that the tighter the constraints, the more creative the solution needs to be. Designer Michael Beirut, who was a member of the global design agency Pentagram, famously said, "The problem contains the solution." The brief that he got for the Yale School of Architecture events posters, which was a project that went on for a long time, had very strict constraints. It had to be one size, one color, and that color had to be black, typography in simple shapes only, and it had to communicate different events and themes each time, so you can't just repeat the design that you have. Boring, is that strict or what? And yet, here's the result. It was dozens of wildly different, innovative posters. They were each unmistakably part of the same system, and yet a completely unique take on what was a very strict brief. Another example is a vibrant waterfront street in Amsterdam that is the result of a super strict brief, and it's 60 units following the same rigid rules, but each with their own unique interpretation, looking amazing, and the perfect modern take on traditional Amsterdam canal houses. Because the truth is that the same constraints often lead to radically different creative solutions. And far from limiting creativity, constraints usually create coherence and force innovation. And that is why I get pissed off when designers say that accessibility kills creativity. Which begs the question, what actually is creativity? Is it only visual effects? Is it only animation? And I'm asking this question because I don't know if I'm preaching to the converted, but in my daily working life, I hear it all the time. I hear that accessibility kills creativity, and I hear that if we can't animate absolutely everything, that we're not going to be creative. But to me, it indicates a fundamental misunderstanding of what a brief is and what good design does and what real creativity actually is. So now I'm going to show, I'm going to move here just a second. It's a randomly picked website out of one of the Web Awards websites, which it's the gift that keeps on giving. And before I let the video run, I'll say once and for all that whenever I look at websites that I didn't make and comment on them, I absolutely never mean to criticize the designers that did them, who in most cases I hugely admire, much less judge anyone, because I know that there are so many things that we don't know when we look at a finished product. Plus, I didn't know about accessibility until I started learning and teaching it. So it's not a judgment, it's just observations. And this website has lovely illustrations and lovely colors. And it's a video, because also this is just the loading time, and it does have sound as well, which I've spared you. And the thing is that this website has lovely illustrations and lovely colors. And yet, because it features unstoppable animations, and I promise you this is enough for me to feel like this. As if I have for people like me who have a vestibular disorder, this website or any website or anything featuring unstoppable animation or autoplay videos, it's as fun as being trapped in a washing machine's fastest spin cycle, or as fun as an ouzo hangover. Don't know if you've ever experienced, but this is what happens to me and many more people than you would think when you use animation this way, in a way that can't be stopped. So, and the other important thing to say is that this beautiful, lovely website, apart from the fact that I'm not yet sure, it's called Curiosity's Life, and the brand is Koyuko. You can go and check it out yourself. But for a screen reader user, this website is completely unusable because it has zero HTML structure. It's an empty, unnavigable shell. And the same goes for anyone who's relying on keyboard navigation. This website may as well not exist at all. Because let's remind ourselves that interaction needs to be usable. We are not creating a visual display or a piece of art. We're creating an interactive tool that needs to be used. It has a purpose. We're there to complete a task. And if there is someone out there that can't use what we created because we make it inaccessible, that's the opposite of creative. And the sad truth about award winners in general, again, I'm generalizing, but the thing is that very often they're absolutely visually stunning, technically impressive, incredible creativity, but often that's the case. They're completely unusable, and they appear to have technical complexity for its own sake, and they show unlimited freedom poorly used. And in the end, the saddest thing is all this imagination, that drives limitations instead of driving innovation. Because what real creativity actually is solving problems in unexpected ways. It's working brilliantly within constraints and creating solutions that actually work for the people who need to use them. And this is another wonderful illustration from this quite amazing website that says Curiosity is Life. And instead of plonking text onto an image with very little contrast so that the text is virtually invisible to a lot of people, why don't we ask ourselves, how might I use my creativity and make this text visible instead? And that's what they have very nicely resolved on this other page, which has the title Curiosity is Life on top of an illustration with a nice color background. Not sure about the contrast, but that's really looking really, really nice. This is this is what I meant to do. Curb cuts. Curb cuts are small ramps that are built into pavements at street crossings, and they were initially created for wheelchair users to be able to get off pavements easily. But once they became common, absolutely everyone finds them useful. It's, if you are a mother with pushing a pram, or if you have a trolley, if you have a suitcase, anything. So this is what it's called the curb cut effect. It's constraint-driven innovation that ends up benefiting everyone. A change designed to help people with disabilities ends up benefiting a much wider population. Because most innovations are essential for some people, but they usually are great for everyone. I'm just going to remind you of so many accessibility-driven innovations. This is just a really short list. Electric toothbrushes, they were for people with reduced mobility. Typewriters and keyboards, they started as accessibility tools. Remote controls that we take for completely granted. Bendy straws even, not to mention all the various tech innovations, speech recognition and voice-activated tech, GPS and navigation systems that were initially military, but then they were fine-tuned for blind people who use them every day. Closed captioning, a personal favorite. Text-to-speech, not to mention audiobooks. I mean, the list goes on. So as it says on the tin, one of the various hills I would die on, accessibility is the best creative brief because it gives you clear constraints that end up adding extra dimensions far from removing them and benefiting everyone. Here's a healthy reminder that there is way more to accessibility than just assistive tech, because 67% of accessibility issues actually come from visual design and content. And I didn't make this up. The source, I have two sources for this, weirdly with exactly the same percentage of 67. One is a DQ white paper, which is, you need to pay for it, so it's not, I can't give it to you. But then it's a Sky TV client survey by Claire Davidson, who led accessibility at Sky for a decade. She ran this survey, and weirdly she got 67% same results. So now, I could choose one of the many design-related accessibility issues that I know very well put no stop at all to creativity, and in fact, they enhance it. But after a long debate with myself, out of the many topics that I could have chosen, I decided I would address the elephant in the room. And that's something that in 2025 should well and truly be sorted already, but it's not quite yet, because it's still the #1 mistake on an alarming majority of websites and apps, and it's color and contrast. Again, I don't know whether I'm preaching to the converted. Maybe all of you already know this, in which case the next few minutes are going to be boring, and you can insult me about it later. But as I still see happening everywhere, I'll stop talking about it when it does change, because the reality is that so many designers still hold this myth that accessibility limits your color palette choices, and you can't be creative with color if you need to be accessible. And I hear it every day with the teams that I train. So I'm sorry, but I call bollocks to that. And let's move on from this, really, because often it's something that people say when they lack proper understanding of color-related wicker criteria, or even creativity and how we can use it when creating interfaces, because I feel that that's where the crux also is. There are 3 main WCAG criteria, and when I say WCAG, just to be clear, I mean Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. There's only 3, and the first one is minimum contrast ratios. You don't even have to remember the ratios, because there are so many tools out there that help us with it. Then you can't rely on color alone to convey information, but which is really best design practice. Design schools used to teach that you have to build everything in grayscale first, and then add the color. We don't do it. They were doing it the wrong way around very often. And then it must work in light and dark mode. There are no WCAG guideline criteria for this. It's just best practice. So we need to consider that. These are way fewer limits than most people think. And it's not usually the colors by themselves, although there are caveats. It's how we combine them. But I also know very well that sometimes we're handed out color palettes by difficult clients that simply won't have it any other way and won't demand to use their brand colors. Well, in my case, the worst client is probably myself, and I'm using myself again because I know I'm not going to sue myself or break an NDA by using the examples in a conference, so forgive me if it's about me again. So I have used yellow and magenta in my own branding since time immemorial, and no, the pink is not because I am a woman. It's because of this record cover, which is the first Sex Pistols album, which is, by the way, another proof of the fact that you can be hugely creative with huge limitations. They were literally using this as a collage made with whatever technology was available to them at the time. Also, I'm old enough to have designed for print for a long time, so magenta and yellow are 2 of the 4 primaries used in print, so that's it. Magenta and yellow, I'm not moving from there. The thing is, however, that magenta and yellow are problematic colors online. And yes, even though I just said that it's about color combination, there is such a thing as vile yellow. as anyone who's ever flown Ryanair will be sadly testifying. Oops. Why is yellow so vile? Because let's think of the visible light spectrum, which is this section of the electromagnetic radiation spectrum, so all the radiation comes from the sun, that is visible to the human eye, and essentially that equates to the colors that the human eye can see, you could call it the rainbow colors. And yellow is found between green and red on the spectrum, visible light, and it has a dominant wavelength between, it has actually a 550, which is what our eyes are most sensitive to. So because I have a few weird, very specific eye conditions, they're not serious, but I have them, I have light sensitivity, and yellow can literally hurt my eyes. But it's totally fine to use in small doses. So not this then, a website that has a completely yellow background. It's a great brand of, beautifully designed brand of chocolate, and it looks great, but please not these vast expanses of yellow. It's way too much for everyone, but it would be completely fine in the button. Now, we're going to go, this is not going to be a complete tutorial that I'm going to give you, because I'll mention a really, really good tutorial that you can get if you want to, but let's go, I said, let's look at my own colors. My base color, number one, is Hex Color FFD 400, which is actually a gold yellow, not a vial yellow. And when I look at the hex color expressed in hue, saturation, and lightness values in the Figma color picker, the hue, that is to say the position on the color wheel, is 50 for this yellow, 50 degrees. And actually the color wheel is a 3D model, but we often flatten it for convenience. My other base color is Hex D60080, also known as magenta dye, and it has, oops, I've gone way too fast, but I know that it has the hue of 324. Let me find myself again. Now, what we need to do is we need to create the neutrals, because by now I only have a yellow and a magenta, and I can't create an interface with that. So I'll start from the off black. And one way to do this is to go to one of my base colors, and I'll start from the yellow, and I'll keep the hue where it is, which is 50, and I'll take down the saturation as well as the lightness. When you have a darker base color, you can simply go all the way down with saturation, which is the richness of the color. So if you take all the color down, you could get a dark enough black. Not in my case. And by the way, I said I would mention a really good tutorial about this, and it's Stephanie Walter, who was also at this conference in 2023, and she recently posted a blog which actually has exactly, she's saying the same thing. She's saying bollocks to not being able to be creative with colors. And she also uses a yellow, and she uses a very, very similar technique to mine. There are differences because, of course, we're all different, but fundamentally she has a brilliant blog post on this. So it made me actually validated me. So this is what I've done for the off black, and I've chosen the yellow for the black instead of the magenta, which is a bit darker, because the result with the magenta would be a deep aubergine, and I just don't like that. Now I need an off-white neutral, and I'm going to use the magenta for it. So I keep the same hue of 324 and take the lightness down to 95 and the and the saturation down to 5. So I've given it a key line because otherwise it would be invisible in this light and on the background. So the X code is F3, F2, F3. So these are my 4 colors for now: gold, smoky black, magenta, and white. I need to check whether they work together in terms of contrast, which, like I said, is super easy. There are so many tools these days that we can use. By the way, one of the reasons why I started from magenta for the off-white and not from the yellow is that never will I ever use yellow and white as a text combination in any shape or form. Avoiding the yellow and white combo is not a creativity limitation. This is another hill I will die on. It's just common sense, it's good design practice. There are other places where you can express your creativity. Just don't do it with yellow and white. On the other hand, the gold with the off black works super well, so I know I can use this combo, although once again, I would avoid it in large quantities. Again, common sense. Then, let's try the magenta with the off-white. Can I do this? It's not as much contrast, but it does pass the contrast test, so I know I can use it. On the other hand, the magenta plus the off-black only really works with large text and only for level AA, which isn't great, but I know I can use it in large calls to action, so it's not completely unusable. Now, of course, if I try and pair the yellow and the magenta, because why not? No, the result is not enough contrast, and also it would look ghastly. I just can't imagine why you would want to do this. It looks alarming. So now the reality is that I only really have 2 fully reliable color combos. Oh my God, absolute disaster. My colors don't work well enough, my creativity is severely crippled, and my client is completely inflexible and won't settle for any other colors. But the thing is that the interface is not just made of interactive elements. We can have decorative elements or images where we can use our problematic-based colors as much as we like, because they will work in larger areas, or this way we can keep the brand on point. And I'll give you a really tiny example. I had a product that had 3 pricing levels. So I started from a Maine Coon cat, giving it the magenta and yellow punky treatment that I like, so that's the cheapest product. And then a cheetah is in the middle of the price range, and then a tiger at the top, looking slightly stunned. So these are places where you can get creative with colors, and there are various others. There's empty states, there's 404 pages. You can look at creating concepts. The decorative elements are usually fine. The contrast, a good color contrast checker will give you usually icons work, as we saw today in the workshop that we did. This is an example of a really lovely 404 page for Keel Foods that has, the 0 is made up of illustrations of vegetables. And again, you have to make sure that you describe the image and so on, but this is a state from, an empty state from Wise that uses a nice illustration and so on. But strictly speaking, someone may now say that images are not accessible, and indeed they rely on just one sense, don't they? They just rely on vision. But the thing is that that's what alt text is for, and yes, alt text is interface, because if you use a screen reader, it definitely is interface. So you can say a Maine Coon cat with a placid stroke smug expression on its face, looking like it was caught with a cream. The image has a black and white punk style treatment with superposed roughly cut lining shapes in yellow and magenta. Should this be just a decorative image? Well, not in my opinion, because it expresses the brand. And as such, if you can't see it, why would you be excluded from understanding what the visual direction is? So the description helps build an idea of what the style is. And if you think that alt text is boring and uncreative, now please humor me. Close your eyes, assuming that you're using your vision, because I don't know, but please close your eyes and just listen. A little brown and white bulldog puppy bravely stands with his front 2 paws atop a short rock on a hike. The trees behind him are changing colors, and the damp leaves surrounding him are all sorts of shades of browns and oranges and reds and yellows. His little pink tongue sticks out slightly from his mouth, and he coordinates with a light pink heart on his nose. His ankle wrinkle supremacy cannot be denied. You can now open your eyes, and here's Tony on his hike, and this is a Twitter account called We Rate Dogs that has the most amazing alt text. And if you think that this doesn't help conversions, they are a part of a charity in order to get dogs adopted, and through the roof. They always place their dogs. There's another wonderful example. We don't have time to read it now, but you'll get the updated slides because the ones that you got are old. And it's the NASA Webb Telescope. It's absolutely amazing, pure poetry. So, back to our color palette problem, because we still have insufficient color combos there. And there are a number of ways that I can complete this palette and make sure that I have all the variations that I need for dark and light mode. This is the color contrast plugin that I was using in Figma, and it has a really nice function that allows you to live check the color and contrast in real time, so you can tweak it as you go along. So I can use that, but I can also use another wonderful tool, which is Color Ramp, and it gives me safe color ramps automatically. I just plonk the hex code in, and I can easily export it in various ways, including a Figma plugin that works wonderfully. On this page is the magenta color ramp, and on this one, the yellow color ramp. But the problem with this method, in my opinion, is it takes the two colors separately. So if I ever want to combine the lightest yellow and the lightest magenta, to me, it's just, I don't know if they work separately. Also, another reason why yellow is indeed problematic is that when we darken it a lot, it goes via a real cack brown, and then it is just not that nice looking. So I usually tweak neutrals by hand. I just prefer it, but you can do it. And my favorite tool to do that is Coolers, which is a color palette tool that makes it really easy to visualize colors together. It's also really client friendly. It has built-in shades, which do tend to stick to the same hue value. And plus, it also, I can, and I absolutely always must, check for color blindness as well, and colors also makes it easy. So it's really easy to share it with clients, because also they can see the hex values in the URL, which is like a nice touch. So back to our color palette. Now I have chosen a dark version of the magenta, because I will always go to a color contrast checker. This is color contrast app, because Coolers I don't trust it to check color contrast, and also it doesn't do it granularly. I prefer to use this tool. So color contrast app. And now, another elephant entered the room a while ago, actually, especially this room. Why didn't I mention OKLCH? Isn't HSL supposed to be out? Aren't we meant to be using perceptual colors already? And what about APCA? If any of you were here in 2023, you probably remember that. So here's a really big shout out to Anton Lovchikov, who gave a fantastic talk in 2023, the only talk that is actually really understandable for me, giving us 3 reasons to switch to OKLCH color system, all valid. OKLCH is basically a perceptual color system. Don't have the time to go into detail here, but also why would I when you already have the best talk ever created on that topic? And Anton is entirely right. HSL is a flawed system, and OKLCH is highly preferable. However, there are a few reasons why adopting OKLCH widely is a bit problematic still. But before I show you that, I want to show you something quite interesting that kind of proves this point. This is, so just to explain quickly that there are 2 standards to check color contrast. One is WCAG 2, and it's a sort of mathematical way of calculating the contrast between background and text. And it's what is the legal, let's say the legal standard right now. And there's another one that's called APCA, which is it's a perceptual algorithm, and it works really well with a OKLCH color space, and it's based on how we perceive colors. So, what we have now in the contrast checker is a very dark, it's actually a midnight blue background with a bright blue on top. And in WCAG 2, this is enough contrast for any size text. I personally cannot read this. I cannot see this at all. And if I check exactly the same color again with the APCA standard, it's not enough contrast because it takes a lot of other things into consideration. It's based on how our eyes work way more than it is on any mathematical formula. So, and this is a system, like I said, it's perceptual, like OKLCH is a perceptual color system. So, why didn't I mention it? Because there's a bit of a conspiracy against OKLCH still, because most widely spread tools have not adopted it yet. The ones that have are not client-friendly, particularly. My computer monitor can't visualize a lot of the colors because OKLCH uses a P3 color space, which is for is what we have on more advanced smartphones and so on. But then a client would say, "Well, I can't see that color." So, but the worst thing of all is that WCAG 3, which is the next standard that we're going to get, will not include APCA, even though we were all banging the drum of the fact that it would include APCA, but it's not. And I know that because this is not a tweet, it's actually a Mastodon by Adrian Roselli, who's an accessibility professional working on WCAG development. He said back in January that it's just not going to happen yet. But even so, I do use APCA and OKLCH, and then I convert in my favorite palette tools, and I make sure that I use values that are visible, obviously, on my monitors, because otherwise there's no point. Because after all this, the main thing is that the reality out there in the wild, what still happens in the real world is that us designers get handed a palette that was built in CMYK by a branding agency that should know that the client is a digital startup that will probably never get anything printed at all. And this is a beautiful palette that has pink, red, yellow, blue, sage, and violet. Brilliant. It looks absolutely great. Full of colors that are completely unrealistic in an interface. Because none of it is right. It has no neutrals, first of all, and it has very, very few accessible combinations with a neutral, such as white or black, and none with one another. And once again, do we want to ever have a pink button with red or purple text? Probably not. So what do we do when we do this? And the client, when we find ourselves in this situation where the client has actually also paid a lot of color for a famous brand, a lot of money, not a lot of color, a lot of money for a famous brand agency to do that palette. Well, clearly, we just don't use it in the interface. We use it in other kind of decorations that completely express the brand, that respect the palette, and that really make the website look colorful, but absolutely with no giving no meaning at all to color, because you can't. And when you turn it to grayscale, it's absolutely fine. It makes no difference. So, if you want to take anything away from all of this, please treat these accessibility requirements as your creative brief. First of all, the grayscale test. Does this work in grayscale only? This will make us focus on what really matters. For instance, actual interactions. The keyboard test. Can I complete this task with keyboard only? So important. Last year, I found my dominant arm in a cast for a long time, and you can't design anything with keyboard only, by the way. So, and we're only ever temporarily abled. We're only a fall on skates away from being unable to work for 2 months. The description test. Can I describe what's happening in words? Very important, the one sense test. Does this work if I remove one sense? And the last one is, the universal benefit test. Who else benefits from solving this constraint? And I can guarantee to you that it's always way more than just one category of people. The one thing to remember and to note is that any of the creative websites out there could literally keep all of the creativity and add new dimensions with accessibility. What do I mean by that? I'll give you one real-world example for all. You may find yourself in a museum in Italy, and there's a medieval painting there that looks like an incredibly vibrant St. George slaying the dragon. And again, you might say, how can this possibly be made accessible in a museum in a physical way, apart from having a QR code with a description that can be read out? Well, what you do is you create a bas relief of it, basically a sculpture of the painting, a faithful Braille version, a 3D rendition of the original painting. I find it absolutely beautiful. It delights me, and I don't need it because I can see it, but it makes me happy inside, even more than the painting by itself does. So once more, accessibility is essential for some and useful for all, and in this case, even delightful. Last word, accessibility is the best creative brief. Full stop. Thank you.